Italians can be very judgmental towards women, women who have, I don't know, many sexual partners or who just had many partners in general.
How is sex education taught in Italy?
Well, it's not.
I know that there is a stereotype of Italian men, and the stereotype is that Italian men cheat quite a lot. So what do you think about the stereotype? How true is it in your personal experience or opinion? Hello and welcome to a new Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today I'm excited to welcome Donatella Fiacchino, a clinical psychologist and sex therapist from Rome. Donatella has also spent a significant time working in the Netherlands and 1 year in Spain. She's a researcher, content creator, and writer, hosting the podcast Sorella, which is all about dating, sex, and LGBTQ plus related topics. Today, we will dive into Italian dating culture and how it's changed over the years, discuss non-monogamous relationships, and talk about the major issues people face these days when it comes to finding and staying in a committed relationship. So welcome, Donatella.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking part. I have a lot of questions for you today. So let's get started. So the first question for you is, let's just start with the basics. For any foreigners that are coming to Italy, what is something that they should know about the Italian dating culture?
Well, that's a good question. I think, of course, we cannot completely generalize because obviously there are individual differences. Those are rooted in experience and family history and in culture, because we do see geographical differences in Italy. For example, we see differences between the North and the South in many things, including dating, between cities and small towns or villages. I would say generally Italy, it has a traditional culture, quite conservative, with a religious background and heritage. So especially people in their 30s, they date with long term in mind. It is not weird to go on dates, to have a lot of different experiences, to have also one night stands, or to be friends with benefits for a while. All of that stuff. It's not, it's not considered strange. But at the end of the day, people look for long term partners, and I think they have very specific expectations when it comes to that.
It's interesting that you mentioned the difference between the North and the South. I think it's very, very important to differentiate the two. I have talked to a lot of people from the South, and I know that it's quite traditional compared to the North. So when it comes to the South, and I would love to hear a perspective on it, I've heard from women that there's an expectation that while the man is free to do his manly thing, to go out and have as much sex, he's actually encouraged to have as much sex as possible. Women are told to hold back, and there's actual sayings and songs about it. Like, if you give it out too much, you're not going to find a man, you're not going to find a partner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is very true. There are double standards when it comes to dating and when it comes to sex in Italy. I'm not sure if it's just in the South. I would say you can hear people talking about this pretty much anywhere. It's just that it is more common to find people that are less strict, or they're less conservative about this in the North and in bigger cities. But yeah, Italians can be very judgmental towards women, women who have, I don't know, many sexual partners or who just had many partners in general. We can see that also in the current discourse about abortion laws and about motherhood. I think women are scrutinized and judged for what they do with their bodies. As a sex therapist, I see that this has an impact on the way that people experience their sex life, in the sense that there are very, very specific rules about how sex should go. But I think in the end, this actually impacts both men and women. So, for example, in straight relationships, men are usually considered to be those that need to be strong, those that need to be always these powerful beings. who are willing to have sex all the time. They need to be ready all the time. While women, they need to be shy, but not too shy. They need to be experimental, but they also need to let their partner take the lead. So yeah, I really think that there is just a specific amount of experience that a woman should have. So enough so that she's not judged and considered to be quote unquote slutty. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think you can never win really because women will be judged anyway. I think it's very sad. I do see that there's a difference in the younger generations, though, especially Gen Z. I think that they're much more free and experimental in relationships and also in sex. But yeah, this is still very strong in our culture.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that, I mean, I love that we got into this topic right away because I think what you're aiming at is that women are encouraged to play a kind of I'm a virgin. I haven't had a lot of experience part. Otherwise, they're judged for that, at least as you mentioned, maybe not in the Gen Z, but maybe like in I'm not sure if you and I are in the same, but like millennials and like that kind of generation still. Obviously not as much as parents or grandparents. That was a whole other story. Maybe we can talk about this later on as well. But for men, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is actually, is it really better for men? Because when you're having sex, you would love to have someone that knows what they want, that doesn't shy away from saying, hey, I think I would like it this way, you know? And then both people get pleasure out of that, as opposed to someone who shuts their eyes and is very, very uncomfortable in the process.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, it does affect men as well because if they are with a partner, and of course, right now I'm just talking about straight relationships or straight situations. But yeah, I think for a man, it would be much easier, as you're saying, to be with a person that knows their body very well and a person that knows what they want and what they don't want. I think if all of this is not communicated, what happens is that there are very strong expectations and there can be also performance anxiety for men. So at the end, all of this affects both. But yeah.
Do you have a lot of clients that come to you with these kind of issues? I mean, do you have any women that come to you in Italy specifically to say that, hey, I feel like I can't tell my partner that this is what I want because I feel like he's going to judge me, or I can't be too vocal about any experiences that I've had, or I feel like I'm being judged if I've had too many partners?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily talk specifically about my clients, just because I think it wouldn't be fair towards them to, share so much into detail. But I can say that generally it is something that happens in Italy. So it is something that people experience in relationships. So the fear of being judged, the fear of not knowing exactly how much they can communicate. Yeah, about that, yeah, I hear about it and I know that it happens, but yeah, I wouldn't disclose too much about my my clients specifically.
No, yes, of course, I understand. Let's talk quickly about the Netherlands in comparison to the Italian dating scene. Have you noticed any differences?
Um, yeah, I think something that you can say that happens in general in northern countries is that they are much more direct. They're much more practical in many ways, including dating. I think there's also the aspect of knowing the language, knowing and I mean the language about emotions and boundaries and all of that. I think part of this is because they actually have sex education in schools, which is something that we don't have in Italy. Part of it, I think, it comes from the way that we are brought up in our households. I think in Italy, it is still very common to have very much of an authoritarian type of parenting style, which doesn't leave much room to a person to express their needs. So all of this combined, I think it makes dating a very different experience in the Netherlands or just the Northern European countries in general compared to Italy or generally Southern European countries. So yeah, I think in the Netherlands it's much more individualistic in a way. So I know what I need, what I'm looking for, and I will express it. While in Italy, I would say it's more, I know what it's expected of me being this person. So being a woman in her 30s, etc., etc. So it's more on a social level that we know what we should do and what we shouldn't. But we are not really taught since we're very young to express our boundaries and our needs. And I think that's really a shame. It can become messy at times.
So Italy is definitely a collectivist society, right? There's
Yeah,
a kind of focus on doing everything in groups. Even
yeah,
traveling, I often, when I was in Italy and I went to Mykonos and I traveled, you see Italians traveling in packs, which is, I assume that's also how kind of the dating starts as well, is like you'll see someone in the group and then that's how you get together. And tell me a little bit about that. So that's also kind of the mindset, is that people need to approve of what you're doing, right? Kind of bringing it back to what we were just talking about, is that because it's not so individualist, it's very much about the group harmony in a way.
yeah. I actually noticed that at times also with friends. There is this aspect that I think it's like building a new family within your friends group, like on the image, on the blueprint of your own family. And yeah, we are collectively a culture that is very big on family and keeping very close relationship with family and with our support system, which can be great in many different situations, but at times it can be very difficult to navigate because then yeah, you might feel the pressure of other people around you judging you and your choices and the things that you do and the people that you want to date.
Interesting. And then you mentioned sex education is not something that you get, at least probably not in the way that you would get it in countries like Sweden or the Netherlands. How is sex education taught in Italy?
Well, it's not. That's the thing. At least in schools, it's not part of the curriculum. It's not compulsory. It might happen in some schools, but if it does happen, it is something that individual teachers or individual schools decide that they want to offer. Otherwise, if they never talk about it, then it's fine. It's not compulsory.
Interesting. So how do people find out about sex typically? I mean, these
Well,
days that it's pretty straightforward, right? These days we have the internet. But in your time, how did it happen?
well, sometimes it can be talking about it in the home, so with parents, with siblings. Sometimes it can be talking about it with friends, and then of course there is a lot of urban legends and things that are not true and that can be also dangerous, that can be passed on, between people or generations. Yeah, so before the internet, it was pretty messy, I have to say. We actually had, unfortunately, especially in the South, but we had very high percentages of teenage pregnancies up until a few years ago. Even now, the percentages are not great. But yeah, thankfully, if the internet has done anything good, then it is that it has made information more available to people. So at
Yeah,
least there is that.
I can relate to the urban legends. We used to say when I was growing up that if you have sex with clothes on, you can't. I'm not even sure what the thing was, but it was something about having sex with clothes on. And I'm not sure how you do that, but we used to have all these, these stories that just didn't make any sense now that I think about them. It's probably how it was in Italy.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second to thank you all for tuning into this podcast. These podcasts take so much work. So any of your support is much appreciated. If you have a second, please go and give it a follow and a 5 stars if you really enjoyed it. Now, back to the episode. So how do you feel that the dating scene, the approach to commitment is changing? At least where you live, at least in Rome, or if you know, about the rest of Italy as well.
I mean, if I have to think about, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, it has definitely changed. And I think there are some things that need to be considered. First of all, as I mentioned before, when people date in Italy, because it's a very traditional culture, they date with long term in mind. Not everybody, not always, but it does happen. But one important thing that I wanted to mention is that divorce became legal in Italy only in 1970. I think that played a huge role in the way that people shifted their attitude towards the idea of commitment. What I mean is that I think before it wasn't even an option to think, oh, is this going to last or not? What are we going to do if it doesn't work out? Like people wouldn't even think about that. It was not possible. And then all of a sudden it became, well, not really all of a sudden, but slowly it became, well, I hope it will last. But if it doesn't, I guess I'll figure something out. And I'm specifically talking about millennials because we grew up as the first generation that had quite a lot of parents that were divorced. While our parents, they grew up with most of their parents that were still together because either it was not legal yet to get divorced or it was really uncommon. So the idea of commitment has necessarily shifted because now we know that we can do other things. So now we know that we don't necessarily have to conform and we don't only have one shot in a way. So, yeah, I think the data actually tells us that people are getting married less and less as time goes on. And the divorce rate has increased. I think between the 70s and now, I think if we look at the data, the divorce rate has tripled. But still, people do look for commitment, but they might do it in slightly different ways. For example, they might get registered as civil partners because it's easier to get out of it. It's faster, it's less complicated, and it's cheaper because you wouldn't need to do a whole divorce process if you want to split it up. It's just it's just paperwork that you do in one day and then you're done. So yeah, I don't think that people don't believe in commitment anymore, but it has a different meaning now.
Yeah, it's so interesting for me, and it's so unfathomable how back before divorce became legal, up until the 70s, people didn't have a choice. Like you get married, and I guess the one positive about that is that it's what they called synthesized happiness. It's like you're stuck in it, so you better make it work because you have no other way, right? And in a way, in some way, it's nice because you're never thinking, what if, However, there are many, many complications that come with that, specifically, obviously, if you're abused, if you're, abortion, again, wasn't legal, as you said. And when did abortion become legal?
I think it was 1979, I think, or something like that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So it was very recent.
Right. So imagine you're married and your husband just, he doesn't care about the fact that you might get pregnant, and also condoms weren't used. And so you're just going to be either giving children endless, like you're going to be giving birth endlessly, and you're going to be stuck in this marriage, and you're going to be a baby making machine, and you have no choice. That's your life, and so I can't imagine that. So there's obviously some positives to it. I don't want to say it's just negative, right? Um, but of course, once you have a choice, then people start to think to themselves, is there a reason for me to get into this? Am I sure I want to get into this relationship? And then, of course, now we're going the other way, which is that a lot of people don't want to commit, right? Because they are thinking, what if? It's the prevalence of choice. And it's like, I maybe could do better. Maybe I don't have to stay with this partner. So I never think it's like a black and white thing. But do you know of any couples, or do you know of any stories of people that lived on that time where they couldn't get a divorce, they couldn't get an abortion?
I mean, there are some stories that became sort of, yeah, historical figures. So I'm thinking of people that actually made the difference, that they inspired lawmakers to actually work on the laws that we have now. So, for example, I'm thinking of Franca Viola, who was a woman who was raped, and she fought against the local government because she didn't want to get married with the man that raped her. So yeah, it basically became the stepping stone to cancel the law that we still had up until I think it was the 60s of you don't get uh, you don't get charged for raping a person if you immediately after marry them. We did have a law that was about this up until recently, and then because of her and because of, well, I would say her activism, we would define her as an activist. Yeah, she fought back and she managed to get the law. Yeah, I don't know how do you say it, but it was basically yeah, they decided to make a law that was against this law, and now it's not possible anymore, obviously and thankfully. So yeah, so there are some stories that are basically part of our history, of our recent political history, that became really famous.
Well,
Yeah, I cannot think of people that couldn't really get a divorce. I think also because luckily we have some systems in place that help, especially women, but that help people that want to get out of situations that in which they don't feel safe. So we have associations, we have NGOs that help these people, and all these groups, they actually started very, very early. So I'm thinking the 50s or the 60s. So during the early stages of this second wave of feminism in Italy, we already had people helping other people. So yeah.
hmm. Okay, well, going from that to now open relationships, I know that a lot of what you do is you work with couples that want to open up their relationship, right? So, talk to me about that.
Yeah, it is actually one of my main topics, one of the things that I work with the most. And I think it is something that can be difficult at times. So, for example, there might be couples that start off as monogamous, and that they at some point they might decide to open their relationship. So the first issue that they might encounter is choosing what type of non-monogamous relationship they want to have. That can definitely be a challenge because sometimes one partner might want to be in an open relationship and the other partner might want to be polyamorous. So yeah, that's something difficult, and other issues that they might have, and for what they might need counseling is communication, because of course in polyamory and in non-monogamous relationships communication is very different. and it's very unique because they pretty much have to set their own rules. Well, I guess even straight couples can do that, and I think they should do that. But uh, non-monogamous relationships for many people feel like totally uncharted territory, so they need to start from scratch with what they want, what they need, what they want to ask each other, what they want to tell each other, what where they want to put like their boundaries. There are like things that they absolutely cannot compromise on. Yeah,
Uh,
compromise is also another big thing. It's another big topic in non-monogamy.
so I have quite a few questions to you about this. So the first one is, explain what is the difference between an open relationship and a polyamorous relationship?
Sure. So in an open relationship, usually there's one main couple, and they might want to have sexual encounters with other people that are outside of the main couple. So obviously there is a hierarchy, and also everything that is romantic, social, everything that has to do with planning for the future and all of that, that all remains within the main couple. Polyamory, on the other hand, it can be described as having more than one relationship at the same time. So that would involve the romantic aspect, the sexual aspect, and also social experiences that people might have with more than one partner. So going on dates, but also going to events together, introducing partners to one's friends and even family, going on vacation, but also having goals for life, like long-term goals. I don't know, buying a house or having a kid. So polyamory really, uh, yeah, it has it all of that is in a relationship, but it can be multiple relationships at the same time.
And is it, I mean, are both common in Italy? And would you say it's mostly between straight couples, gay couples, or even in between gay couples? Do you see it's more with male to male relationship or female to female relationship? I have my own assumptions on this, but I would love to hear how true they are actually.
So I actually have I've seen the data that is about Europe more in general. So I don't actually have scientific data on this about Italy. I assume that the pattern in the data in Italy, it might be very similar to other countries. So generally speaking, gay couples and especially couples that are of two men, they tend to have open relationships. They might start off as monogamous and then they might open up the relationship. Um, for gay women, they tend to be monogamous, but there are also a lot of them that are in polyamorous relationships. And for straight couples, it's mostly open relationships. I do think that polyamory is becoming more and more common. I think it's also thanks to social media. I'm not saying that it's becoming trendy. I don't think that people would enter into something like that just because it seems fashionable. But I think what social media did is that it helped people just opening up and talking about some aspects of their lives that before it was seen as something that needed to be secret because it wouldn't be understood. So it opened conversations. So I think that's great. Um, so
And
yeah,
is there usually a point in the relationship where people decide to open up their relationship? So do you find that, is it a, how can I ask you this? I mean, is it that two people come together and they think, okay, we're both not the type of people that would like to be in a monogamous relationship. So let's just right away set this up as an open relationship. Or is there a point in time where they feel like the sex has become a little bit more routine, or, they see each other more as relatives as opposed to sexual partners, that they feel like, let's open it up. But have you noticed any kind of pattern in this?
Um, I think it really depends. I think younger generations, they might start off as already non-monogamous, because they getting they get to learn about these topics very early. So even sometimes even before they start dating, or sometimes when they just started dating people, so late teens, early 20s. So what they do, they look for partners that already have that idea in mind of they're looking for basically non-monogamous relationships. So I think for younger generations, what they do is they might use dating apps, or they might join events that are specifically for non-monogamous people. So aperitivo or things like that they are organized, especially in bigger cities. And those are specifically for people who want to meet other non-monogamous people. Well, I think for older people, it really depends. Sometimes it can be something that people try to see if they can, quote unquote, save the relationship. So if they see that things are not really going well, or if if they're going through a rough patch, or if they're getting older, they're in a new phase of their lives and in a new phase of their relationship, and they feel they're becoming more and more distant. They might want to try it to get closer to each other. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And other times it might be just one of the two people in the relationship who gets curious, who might start to read about it, who might start to listen to podcasts or things like that. They might have a friend who just started an open relationship, and so they might introduce the topic with their partner.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch this movie called Newness. And it's about a couple that comes together. They're both very much, I guess, what you've mentioned with the people that are inclined to open the relationship right away. And so this movie follows this couple that very much like they have sex very fast, and then they're the kind of people that easily get bored, and they're always looking for novelty. And so they open up their relationship immediately, and you kind of see what starts happening because they're very confident in the fact that, oh, it's going to be very easy to pull it off, right? And they go to see Esther Perel. I'm sure you know of Esther Perel. She's one of my favorite I guess therapists, sexologists, and her belief. I'm sure you've read her book, Mating in Captivity. She talks about how too much closeness can actually kill desire. And I guess it's with the in the movie, we kind of see that they're trying to keep the desire alive. However, what starts happening is that she gets involved with another man, and then you see the dynamics really, they just start struggling with the dynamics. They can't really hold it together because, as you've mentioned, communication has to be very specific. And you mentioned something about compromise as well, right? So tell me a little bit about communication and what does it take to keep this kind of relationship going?
Well, I think it's actually very simple, but it's very difficult to apply. I think it's being radically honest, talking about one's feelings and needs, and making very, very clear requests. I think that's it, pretty much. So it's like, I don't know, 3 4 steps basically. If you know about Marshall Rosenberg and his nonviolent communication, I'm a huge fan. And that one is basically 4 steps. So you make an observation on something that a person has done or something that's happened. You say how you feel about it. You talk about your needs that are not met in that moment, and then you make a request so that the other person can meet your needs, and that's it. And It seems extremely simple, but the issue is that what people do usually is they might start thinking, oh, if I say this, I might sound, etc., etc. I don't know, selfish. I might sound arrogant. I might sound whatever. Or, oh, I shouldn't ask this because he or she should know already what I need. He should know or she should know what a person should do in a situation like this, which, yeah, most of the time it doesn't work like that. We're not mind readers. But all of this, it definitely applies to any relationship, not even just romantic relationships. You can apply this in the workplace. You can apply this in, in family dynamics. But it's especially important when you open a relationship because you pretty much you're on your own. I think you're on your own all the time in this world. You need to you need to talk about your own needs. You need to stand up for yourself, but especially in an open relationship because you're getting other people involved. So it's not, there's nothing that is obvious. There's nothing that needs to be taken for granted. You, as I said before, you start from scratch. You build something that you never experienced, that you've never seen in your environment. So you need to be in touch with your feelings and with your needs. And if both people do that, then they can really, um, they can really pull it off, and they can really work in that without hurting each other and hurting themselves in the process.
You know, the way I think about open relationships, this is my very subjective point of view, is that I feel like if you're in a very strong, stable relationship and it's been, say, 10 years, and you feel like, look, I love this person, but I need a little bit of variety. I think personally that has, and correct me if I'm wrong, but almost like it's an easier feat because you already have such a strong foundation that anything else you add to the mix is just going to be more of a sexual release and more of a novelty, right? When you start off a relationship, I know I had a friend, she started a relationship with a guy who wanted to keep things open. And so what she had discovered, but she didn't really want that, right? So we could see that he was getting his thrill out of the novelty. He really liked that, like keeping his options open. However, as soon as she kind of pushed him to close the relationship, they stopped having sex. He didn't want to have sex. For him, the drive to have sex was, I think it was that novelty, right? And so I feel like if you right away open the relationship, while of course it might work for people, it's a harder relationship to build because you don't know each other. And so you have to build something really, really strong for you to take that relationship as number one and the rest of the people as an option. Although you've mentioned polyamory, which is, again, a few different relationships, which is even more complicated because it takes so much effort to even build one relationship. I don't know how people get the time and the energy to build multiple relationships and to commit to those relationships to give it their all. I just feel like it's so much work. And to that, I'm a jealous person. I would I understand the concept where you have wonderful communication and your partner comes to you and says, look, this person is attractive. I'm going to go have sex with them. But in my mind, I just picturing your partner having sex with someone else it's just so uncomfortable. And I can imagine that a lot of people come to you and struggle with that as well, with that. Oh, in theory, it seems fun, but actually in reality, like I can't control my feelings very well. What if they're going to fall in love with that person? What if they're going to leave me for that person? It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, I think jealousy is a huge topic in general, but specifically in non-monogamy. I think it's an opportunity to ask oneself, okay, but what is going on? Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? And the answer can be either that, you're not feeling secure in what you're doing. So maybe you shouldn't be in a non-monogamous relationship, it can be the case. Not everybody should, try everything. I think there are people that are monogamous in like at the core, like people that were born monogamous, and that for them it's like their sexual orientation. It is called relationship orientation for a reason. And
Wow.
some people are non-monogamous, um, and some people can have monogamous or non-monogamous experiences. So they might identify in a certain way, but they might want to try something, and that's also fair. It's fine as long as you don't hurt yourself and you don't hurt other people. Then it's all good. But yeah, back to jealousy. So it might be something that is telling you you should not be in this situation, or it might be something that is telling you there is something that I need to work on, either with a partner, with partners, with myself. I think it's really important to understand what's underneath that jealousy. So if it is just, oh, I cannot think of my partner having sex with other people, well, I think that's a sort of like a limited way of looking at it, because you're just talking about one very, very specific moment and one very specific image in your head. But if you try to generalize a bit more, what is it that you have in your relationship? What is it that you imagine that might be in a relationship that your partner might have with other people? And what is it taking away from you? What is it doing to you?
Mm.
What is happening between you and your partner that is affected by the relationships that your partner has with other people? So there's many, many different questions that a person can ask themselves when they feel jealous. In general, I think it is important to understand that there is much more underneath, that is not just, oh, if I imagine this, then I feel jealous. That's barely the surface.
Mm. I know a guy who has told me he was in an open relationship. And when I'd asked him, I mean, how did it make him feel? So he was dating a girl who was bisexual. She had wanted to keep the relationship open. I don't think he was super keen, but he just kind of went along with it. And he had told me that when he had pictured her with other men or women, he felt good because she was getting pleasure out of it. And that made him feel good because he loved her. And it was something I personally couldn't relate to. And as you said, it's not for everybody. It's the certain type of mindset or a viewpoint or a sexual need or whatever it is that you need to have this relationship. But let's talk about something that is not non-monogamy, but still happens, and that's cheating. Because I know that there is a stereotype of Italian men, and the stereotype is that Italian men cheat quite a lot. So, what do you think about the stereotype? How true is it in your personal experience or opinion?
Well, I think it is very difficult to say, or is it more than before? Is it a lot? How often is it happening? Because we don't have a real perception. We might have the perception that is based on what we hear, what we experience, but it's one of those things that goes under the radar. What I think is happening is that people now, they feel like they can talk about it a bit more. They can open up and they can be honest a bit more than before. And I think um, uh, it goes back to what I was saying before, that people are shifting their idea and their definition of commitment. So now they think, well, I hope it lasts forever, but if it doesn't, I guess it's fine. The people that are cheating on their partners, uh, they might, at some point, they might want to yeah, come clean and just be honest, because they think, well, this is not my one shot, one opportunity thing. This is just one of many relationships that I might have in my life. So yeah, this happened. Okay, let's move on. And same thing with the people that get cheated on. So in the past, I think what they could do was, well, they didn't have many options. So what they would do usually was to pretend that nothing was happening. I think now people take action. They end the relationship, and they get away from situations that are not serving them. So I think it seems like cheating is happening more often just because people are talking about it more. I'm not sure if the stereotype about Italian men specifically is something real, but it definitely feeds into that, or the whole narrative of Italian men being very sexy and experienced and all of that. But um, yeah, I think at the end it's just a stereotype. I don't think we have different percentages than other countries, but I don't think we will ever know that because, yeah, it would be very difficult to research this. I don't think many people would be okay with, with talking about it in the context of a formal research.
Yeah.
And I'm very big on data, so I wouldn't say anything that is not supported by data. Like I wouldn't say, yeah, this is happening for sure. But the general sense that I get is that it's probably as common as in other countries.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to cheating because I think we have assumptions specifically about like warmer climate people, right? Like, and a lot of these assumptions are probably true in a way, right? Because we have, let's say, like Brazilians or Colombians or Mexicans, they're known to kind of to at least want to cheat, or that there's a saying that, oh, like Latinos, they cheat more. However, actually, like you mentioned, there's no statistics, and I agree, there's no like real statistics there. I've seen something, and it was actually that Scandinavians are the ones to they do cheat as well, and that's not something you would assume, right? Because you're thinking, well, no, because they come from a colder climate, they're more, like this, like that. Um, but there is a stereotype of Italian men cheating, and I think it's because, again, it might be true to an extent. I think partly is you've mentioned that it used to happen and women didn't do anything about it because they couldn't, so they stayed married, right? Um, Whereas maybe in other cultures they would have left, and it's also the fact that Italian men, they're quite flirty with foreign women a lot of times because maybe they believe with Italian women, it's a little bit harder for them to to sleep with them, right? They have to put in more work. So when foreign women come, they come to Italy for the experience. They find it an easier way to get sex. So not sure if that's how the stereotype has evolved, whether there's a lot of truth to it or not. I personally don't know. But it is interesting that there is this stereotype. Yeah. Um, let's talk about your work with mixed nationality couples. Uh, what typically, are there like cultural pairings that you see that are more common? Let's say, do you see more Europeans with Asians or Italians with, I don't know, Germans? Are there any patterns that you see?
Well, to be honest, I never really observed a specific pattern. I think nowadays people move so much for work that you can really find any type of pairing, really. And I think, well, one thing that I observed was that it was really interesting to see, also in my friends, the dynamics that are created within couples that are from the same, I would say, region. So let's say one partner is from Italy, the other one is from Greece, versus the what happens when people are from two very very different cultures. So let's say Dutch and I don't know, Argentinian, for example. So yeah, that was something that I observed. It's very interesting because when the cultures are very similar, um, then you can see that the communication sometimes it is easier, but then also the conflict, it can be stronger because the communication seems easier. um, then the conflict, it starts from a place of how is it possible that we're not understanding each other, or how is it possible that we are fighting about this because we always think the same thing, you know? While for couples that come from very, very different cultural backgrounds, what I've noticed, and again, this is in my friends actually, not in my clients, but they might start from the point of view that okay, we already know that we are very, very different, so we might want to tackle this in a way that looks into compromise rather than one is going to be the one who's right and one is going to be the one who's wrong in this. So it the conflict doesn't become a competition. It becomes oh, we've got a problem, we need to solve it, and we know that we come from very, very different places. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, I mean, a lot of what I do is focus on very, very contrasting couples. This is where I find it fun. Like, 'cause again, if I take an Italian and a Greek couple, okay, you'll see some cultural differences, of course, but a lot of it when it comes to emotions and temperament and the way you express yourself and the way you deal with conflicts, like it's quite similar still. It's a Mediterranean culture. But when you would take Dutch and say, okay, Argentinian or Brazilian or whatever, then people also kind of understand that it's a different culture. And so like you have to tackle not the person, but the cultural difference. And so it becomes, I always tell people like, don't focus, figure out what is a cultural difference and maybe what is a personal difference, right? Because a lot of it can be the way you see the world. And it's just the very different way that you see the world. And that's when you shouldn't get angry. You should try to understand why you see things the way, you see things. So yeah, that's a great comparison with these two. And of course, you've lived in the Netherlands as well. You know quite a bit about the culture. When it comes, have you ever seen like Italian Dutch relationships? Do you have any friends that are Italian Dutch?
No, actually, I don't. But I guess it would be again that type of difference. Yeah, a collectivist versus an individualistic type of culture, and more practical versus more well, based on stereotypes and based on expectations. So yeah, I guess that's what would happen, I suppose.
Mm. What are typically like the hardest parts of these mixed nationality couples? What do people struggle with the most?
um I guess communication when things become more complicated, because what I noticed is that when it comes to basic emotions, that really, like, it doesn't really have a cultural component. At the end of the day, we're all humans, but the real difference is the way that we label, the way that we understand, and the way that we express emotions, and the way that we think about our emotions. So, yeah, what I think that is the biggest struggle is also what people think that is acceptable to communicate within the relationship. So, different cultures might have different ideas on what is okay to share and what is something that people need to work out by themselves. So, yeah, that's something that sometimes might create conflict, because in some cultures there might be the expectation that if there is something that is bothering me, I need to talk about it with my partner, and we need to figure out a way to solve it or work on it. And in other cultures, it might be, um, well, your feelings are your feelings. You need to work on that. Um, and I mean, there's no right or wrong in this. I think it's just, yeah, it's a cultural difference. And again, it's about finding a way to compromise and finding common ground.
Yeah, I think working with mixed couple cultures is always very interesting because you don't have that common background, right? And a lot of times you really need to work with each other on, and especially a lot of what I focus on as well when it comes to gender roles, as well, and the way we show affection and the way I think even sometimes people need a lot of healthy distance in a relationship, where certain cultures they can be almost suffocating with the amount of affection they want to show. Sometimes it's just a personal thing, but a lot of times it's also a very cultural thing, right? Also, like family values, right, can be a big one. I assume as an Italian, family values are quite strong in the culture, more or less, of course. And so if you're dating someone, let's say, who is potentially, Dutch, who are not as still close to their family, but not as close or as, let's say, I don't want to say controlled by their family, but controlled by their family's opinion as much, I can imagine that it could be quite difficult. Have you had any couples that broke up? And maybe you don't need to share like your personal, the people that you work with, but just of any couples that that broke up over a difference that they just couldn't fix.
Well, I guess that's, in a way, if you think about it, that's pretty much all the couples that break up. Like, that's, I mean, unless something happens, something that can be very big, something that can be sometimes tragic. Other times, I think you could say it is realizing that you're not compatible. Like, that's pretty much it. It just, it manifests in different ways. So if you realize that you're not compatible, you might say, well, whatever, I'm just going to cheat because we're not compatible. This relationship is not going to survive anyway. Or you might start to resent your partner because you think, oh, well, they're never going to understand me anyway because we're not compatible. So I'm not even going to try. But then you build up resentment. Or I don't know, people might make very, very big decisions that have to do with their job or where to live or both these things. And they might think, oh, I'm not even going to involve my partner in the decision because we're not compatible. They might not be able to see it from my perspective, again, because we're not compatible. So we don't work uh, in a similar way. We just process things differently. So I'm just gonna make my own decision about this, and then when the truth comes out, then there's gonna be conflict. So yeah, I think this is just what happens when relationships end, pretty much all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. And you can be not compatible in the same culture, and you can have a whole other layer of not incompatibility when you're dating someone from another culture, right? And you've lived and you worked in a few countries around Europe. How have these international experiences shaped your understanding of dating and relationships across different cultures? What are some of the differences that you noticed in between these cultures?
Well, I think I definitely don't take anything for granted anymore. Because I've seen so many different perspectives on the same thing. So I think, okay, this seems very obvious to me. Maybe another person might not even understand what I'm talking about. So that's one thing that has helped in general, in life, in dating, in my work. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that people, despite having different cultures, different backgrounds, they are very, very similar in many, many ways. They, as I was saying before, they might talk about certain things in different ways. They might express their emotions in different ways, but at the core, we're all the same. We all work in a very, very simple way because the human body is very simple and the human mind is actually quite simple if you think about it. So, yeah, it also helped me to realize that you just need to understand what language you need to use. And I'm not talking about like Spanish or Italian or Dutch or English. I'm talking about like really understanding the type of language that the person that is in front of you wants to use, and then you can see if you can adapt. And this happened, in my personal life, in my work, in my studies, pretty much in everything. I think it's about understanding if you can adapt.
After living in the Netherlands or in Spain, is there anything that you realized about Italian culture or Italian dating scene that you didn't realize before leaving?
um I think I realize how strong that double standard is, the double standard that we were talking about when we were talking about gender roles. When I was immersed in it, I didn't quite grasp how strong it was, how much it was affecting people's lives, my life. Um, yeah, I think this is something that happens to people all the time when they leave their country, they live somewhere else for a while, and then they go back. Yeah, they see, isn't it the reverse culture shock that people talk about? You
Well,
see your own culture from a different perspective, and you realize, wow, that thing was really, really prominent, and I was not really seeing it, and now I do. So yeah.
yeah. It's like asking the fish in the water tank, like, how is the water,
Yeah.
right? Whenever I do interviews, I always love talking to people that have been abroad because you really get a perspective of how your culture, otherwise you just say, well, isn't it like this everywhere, right? Like you don't realize. But when you talk about double standards, could you clarify that? So when you talk about double standards, we're talking about the way that women are expected to still have little sexual experience compared to the men. Is there anything else that's a double standard in Italy?
Well, I'm thinking again about human bodies because, the experience of the human body is something that I work a lot with in my clinical practice as well. So, like how the emotions are expressed in the body and how they are felt in the body. So I think this is something that is very important to me. The way that women take care of their body, the way that they for example, the way that they show up in society, that there are very specific standards for women that are not as specific and as high for men. So in that as well, I see this double standard. Also, another thing that I'm seeing more and more is the expectations on the emotional load. So women are usually expected to take more of the emotional load in a crisis, in a family, in a conflict within a couple, in difficult phases of somebody's life. For example, a couple just had a baby. Well, usually for the woman, it is a very emotional time, and it is a time of many different changes in her body and her mind. um, Still, she's usually expected to handle it and handle it very well. So, for example, the percentage of women that actually have postpartum depression and don't get help for that, it's very big in Italy because it's not even recognized. Again, because of the double standard, because women are supposed to be able to manage it all. Um, yeah, they're required to be more complex, more um, more effective. Uh, I think, in our society, they get a lot of pressure in pretty much any field. So in the workplace, in the family, in school. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting to listen, to that. I'm originally Russian, and I mean, I lived in Canada when I was quite young, but I know that in Russia there's a really crazy double standard, and I'm sure you know this about Eastern Europe is um, that women are supposed to give birth and look flawlessly beautiful right after. There's a story my friend has told me that her friend has given birth, and right away she went to the nail salon because her husband would have been upset if she wasn't put together. This woman just gave birth. And stories like this are really, really rampant. And not only is she expected to be a great mom, she's supposed to also work and but still like take care of the house. Like there's still a lot of expectations now more than ever, because you're not just doing one thing, you're supposed to do multiple things, and so it is really interesting to hear your side of it. And you're right, like if we compare it to the Netherlands, there's definitely more of an equal workload that both partners put into it. There's a lot of there's a lot of talk against northern men like Germans, the Dutch, because they are not as chivalrous when it comes to the dating itself, right? So there's there's like the splitting the bill, going Dutch, all of that, right? Of course, women see that as a lot of women see that as the downside, right? But then, of course, like in the relationship, it's very much equal. So you take I suppose the bad with the good, or you get a mix of that. So whereas in Italy, I suppose it's still more of a chivalrous culture, that the man is still expected to kind of provide a more beautiful date, or be chivalrous really. But in a relationship, there's this issue as well. Yeah. One last question that I have for you is that I wanted to talk really quickly about the LGBTQ plus relationships. That's not something I talk about in my podcast, in my channel. It's not something I know a lot about. I don't know the dynamics very much. And it's a very big conversation for sure. But since it's something that you work with, I wanted to at least talk a little bit about it. What are, the common issues that LGBTQ plus individuals face in relationships?
Well, I think it really depends on the country. So I would like to talk about Italy specifically, because I think for the countries that I lived in and also studied and worked in, the situation is very different than Italy. So in the Netherlands, for example, the Netherlands was the first country in Europe to legalize gay marriage. Gay couples can adopt kids, and LGBTQAI plus culture is very much integrated in the rest of all the social issues and in the culture of the country. So I wouldn't say being straight or being queer in the Netherlands would be exactly the same. Obviously, it's not the same. There are still some very specific issues, but I would dare to say it's a lot easier to be queer in the Netherlands than in Italy. And Spain, again, very different, very religious. In a way, sometimes it can be a conservative country, but still, for what I've seen, heard, observed, it might be easier to be queer in Spain than in Italy. I also have to say I lived in Barcelona, so that's definitely different than other parts of Spain. It's a big city, it has its own very, very specific culture. So, yeah. But in Italy, I think there's still stigma, a huge stigma around the LGBTQAI plus community, that manifests in relationships being sometimes extremely difficult, to the point that people sometimes might be in a relationship, um, and they might not have come out with their family, and sometimes even with their friends. So they have to keep the relationship private. They might suffer from bullying in school, university, or discrimination in the workplace, and that also it might take a toll on the relationship. Um, uh, Same-sex couples in Italy, they cannot get married. They can get the civil partnership, which it has some limitations compared to the legal marriage. They cannot adopt kids. They cannot do IVF. So there's a lot of different things that have to do with the law and the culture and um, the religious background of the country. yeah, so many things that might make it more difficult for queer people to experience their relationships in a way that is spontaneous and free and just yeah, just living their lives. Really, sometimes it might be difficult. There's also the issue of feeling lonely because it's not as common to come out in Italy compared to other countries. Queer people, especially those that are in smaller cities, smaller towns, or in the south, they might find it difficult to find a partner or just to meet people that are part of the community. So feeling lonely is still something that might happen to queer people, queer Italian people. Um, I guess the internet has helped in that. Again, dating apps, social media, all of that. It has definitely made it easier. But still, I mean, just a few days prior to the day that we recorded this podcast, there was a homophobic, violent attack against a couple in Rome. They were just walking around holding hands, and some people attacked them. So yeah, it's still difficult for sure, but I, again, in the younger generations especially, I see that there is much more understanding, much more flexibility, much more, even straight young people are very accepting, and they're open-minded. So that really, yeah, it makes me very hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I honestly didn't realize that it was still, so behind because, as you mentioned, the Netherlands, but also, I mean, I think Spain is quite liberal when it comes to this kind of stuff, at least in the bigger cities, right? And maybe not so much like in the south of Spain or, different regions, but overall, like there's quite a lot of gay pride parades, and a lot of it is, it feels very much accepting. And it is interesting how Italy, and I lived in Portugal as well, and I see there's quite a lot of similarities with this like Catholic mindset that's still, uh, it's still very much lagging behind. You mentioned as well with abortion, like that took quite a long time. So things take quite a long time to catch on because of this, I think, Catholic mindset that, so yeah, that's very interesting. And it is quite sad that you can't just be in a couple, not even making out heavily on the street, which I can see is done by straight couples in Italy all the time, right? But simply holding hands and just being together out in public. Yeah, it is something sad to hear. And it's sad that I have to finish the podcast on this somber note, but thankfully things are changing, right? So uh, it's with the newer generation as well, with the internet and, with all of this, we're going to see some changes soon. Donatella, thank you so much for taking part in this podcast. It was so interesting to hear your takes and the statistics that and your experiences, working with clients, and also to get more of a sense of what it's like dating in Italy, and also to understand what it's like to be in a non-monogamous or polyamorous relationship. It's not something I ever talk about. It's the very first time. So if you guys enjoyed it, or if you guys have any thoughts on this, let us know below. Could you picture yourself in a non-monogamous relationship? Let us know below. And also, if you have any questions for Donatella, leave them below. Maybe at some point she'll scroll through this and she'll reply to you guys. I'm also going to leave all your links to your socials and to your podcast and on this YouTube video, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you're going to find it there as well. Donatella, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thanks, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Ciao.